You may have seen this. Professional football player Harrison Butker of the NFL's Kansas City Chiefs. He drew a lot of flags from the left this week when, in a graduation speech at Catholic Benedictine College, he addressed President Biden's retreat from Catholic orthodoxy, things like transgender ideology and protecting the unborn and so forth. But perhaps the most important thing he said that absolutely drove the left nuts was that he suggested that some of the women who were graduating would find motherhood and raising their family to be more fulfilling than a life dedicated to a cubicle and a corporate career.
I say all of this to you because I have seen it firsthand, how much happier someone can be when they disregard the outside noise and move closer and closer to God's will in their life. Isabel's dream of having a career might not have come true, but if you asked her today if she has any regrets on her decision, she would laugh out loud without hesitation and say, heck no.
Wow. That was Harrison Butker himself, and a powerful, powerful speech that he gave. But frankly, it was just too much for the left, and their criticism has been coming from all corners, including the NFL league office, as well as officials in the Kansas City government. It's just been blowing up. So what does it all tell us when a Catholic man speaking Catholic orthodoxy to a Catholic audience and receiving a standing ovation, I might add, and yet now he's considered being out of bounds? Unbelievable. Well, joining me now to discuss this on our weekly Worldview segment is David Closson. He's the director of the Center for Biblical Worldview here at FRC. David, welcome back to Washington Watch. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me again, Jody.
All right. Well, from what I've seen, at least, the headlines don't accurately capture what Butker actually said. So can you go back and kind of provide a quick overview from the highlights of his 20-minute graduation speech?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, Jody, it was a 20-minute graduation speech. And it was a really good speech. I read through the transcript and actually watched part of it when the school posted it online. And he addresses the fact that this graduating class entered college during the COVID-19 pandemic, and he kind of acknowledged at the onset the difficulties that graduating seniors this year, they really had a different college experience than most of us have. He kind of quickly pivoted to the bulk of his speech where he talked about how the cultural values that have long upheld Western civilization, the cultural values that Americans have long held, are quickly deteriorating. And he pretty early on in the speech mentioned some of those and specifically attacked President Biden on the gender ideology issue, on abortion. And again, he's speaking to a very devout Catholic graduating class. And he made the point that if you're going to profess to be Catholic, you actually need to believe and live out Catholic teachings and Catholic convictions. And then from there, Jody, he just really talked about the importance of this graduating class living out their vocation and the importance of leadership. And so it had the typical, some of the admonitions that you'll hear in most graduation speeches, but I thought what was most helpful about it is his just encouragement to this graduating class of students to do hard things and to live an authentic Christian life.
It's amazing that for doing so, he kind of receives the flag, to use an NFL picture, or being thrown out of bounds, when in reality, the ones who ought to be getting the flag are those who are not, those professing Catholics especially, like the president, who are not upholding the Catholic teaching. So it seems to me like it was bold, but certainly not out of bounds to criticize the president, abortion, transgender ideology, and even from what I understand, Catholic priest he mentioned who have strayed from the Orthodox teachings of the church. But all of that is not really what has drawn the biggest reaction. What was the big deal that just kicked the hornet's nest of the left?
No, that's right, Jody. And there are a lot, his critique on gender ideology and abortion and DEI. And He even referred to Pride Month as a glorification of the deadly sin. There's a lot in there, but his main point, about 2/3 of the speech, when he talked about vocation, and he addressed the ladies in the crowd, and then he pivoted and addressed the men. But it's what he specifically said to the female graduates. He specifically said that some of you are going to graduate and go on to have successful careers, but I imagine most of you are most excited about marriage and the children that you will bring in to the world. And then he, very movingly, he actually choked up at one point, talked about his own wife, and how the most important title that his wife holds is that of homemaker. And what's fascinating, Jody, is that there was an 18-second applause. That was the only time where he had to stop speaking because the crowd, of devout Catholic families, parents and graduates, they loved it. They ate this part of the speech up. And then from there, he addressed the men, and he talked about how men are told that it's not necessary for them to be in the home and in the community, and that the importance of men setting the tone in their communities, how the men should use their skills for God's glory. But Jody, it was without a doubt, if you're looking at the news right now, the fact that he dared to suggest that women graduates, many of them are looking most forward to getting married and having children. That was just a step out of bounds. Call the flag for daring to suggest that.
Wow. And, here's a Catholic man speaking to a Catholic audience on a Catholic campus, speaking Catholic doctrine, and all those on the outside are just going crazy with it. So let me ask you, as we get into the biblical worldview perspective of all of this, what do you make of the left's reaction?
Yeah, I'm not surprised, Jody, because he dared to criticize the sacraments of the left. The secularist worldview, it is a worldview, and it is a theological worldview. It's atheological, but they have positions and commitments and convictions. And he dared to challenge their commitment to abortion and gender ideology. He dared to critique the lies of feminism. And so these are, such sacred cows, so to speak, on the far left, that when someone with he's a 3-time Super Bowl champion, when he dared to suggest an alternative Christian perspective, a Christian worldview that diverges from kind of the accepted secular orthodoxy, there's this firestorm. And I think that he dared to critique some of these things is in large part why there's been so much outrage.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, here's a 3-time Super Bowl champion. Look, it may be worth mentioning, he's really good at his job, right? I mean, he's got an incredible career in the NFL, and the media may try to do everything in the world they can to cancel him, but I feel quite confident the Kansas City Chiefs, they're not getting rid of him. I mean, but I'll tell you this. I don't know if you just heard the interview with Sarah Holliday with the unfolding of the Billy Graham statue a little while ago, but that had to also, in addition to this, with what happened at the speech, Billy Graham was honored at the Capitol. We have a graduation speech that stands for Christian principles. Freedom from Religion Foundation was just one of the organizations that was raising a fuss all about this. But it was a rough day for the left when it comes to Christianity being out front and center, unashamed, speaking truth in the midst of a culture that is doing everything they can to bury the truth and to silence those who will voice the biblical message in the front and center of our culture. What are your thoughts?
Well, no, I agree with that 100%, Jody. And I, too, had the opportunity to go to the Capitol yesterday and to see the statue. And it's a remarkable statue. It's a wonderful depiction of Reverend Graham. And on the sides, they have engraved John 3:16 and John 4:15 or 4:16. Where Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And the verse goes on to say, no man comes to the Father except through me. And so there are Christian claims being made on this statue that's going to be there in Statuary Hall. And you're right, that's making the left's head explode because you have explicit Christian claims that are being made. But you know what's interesting, Jody, and I think the left doesn't like to talk about this, is that these views that we're talking about, the views that Reverend Graham espoused, they're shared by tens of millions of people. Reverend Graham, during his lifetime, for 61 years, was voted in the top most in Gallup's most admired man in America. 61 times during his lifetime. And so these views that we hold that stem from Scripture on the sanctity of life, on the sanctity and dignity of marriage, the exclusivity of the gospel, the way of salvation, these actually are shared by tens of millions of Americans. And I think when those of us who hold these convictions enter the public square and profess these values and these beliefs, by the way, values that our culture depends on and that our nation was founded on, the left really increasingly gets so frustrated and can't stand it.
Yeah, a great point. I mean, here's Billy Graham's one of only 4 in America's history that has received the Medal of Honor recognition, lied in state in the Capitol, and has a statue after him. Only 4 people in our nation's history. And as you mentioned, here's an individual who for years, decades, was named among the most admired people in America. What happened? What happened to the left to all of a sudden turn on him?
Yeah, and I think that's a fair question, because even when you look at Reverend Graham's life, he was a counselor not just to Republican conservative presidents. Some of the presidents he was closest to would be Lyndon Baines Johnson. He was also very close to Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, when Reverend Graham passed away, went out to pay his respects in person to the Graham family. And so I think what explains this is in the last 20, 25 years, our nation really has taken a sharp turn away from biblical values. And unfortunately, and this is reflected in biblical illiteracy, drops in the incidence of biblical worldview, but we have a militant secularism, and we have things like the LGBT moral revolution, things like this, Jody, that really again, I use the term moral revolution intentionally because it is a revolution in morality, that the velocity of this revolution has, I think, taken many of us off guard, especially older generations who are now looking around saying, this isn't the country I grew up in. And so I think there's a lot of complexity here, but in the last 20 years, a lot has happened.
It really has, but I would just like to remind all our viewers and listeners that in spite of all the cultural drifts that are taking place, we still do have religious protection.
Yes.
As described for us by God in our Constitution. And in fact, just recently, that led to a court decision that a Catholic church can legally discontinue hiring any substitute teacher that lives counter to Catholic teachings. How important is it for us to remember that not only biblically do we have the mandate to stand and to be salt and light, but here in America, we are still blessed with a Constitution that allows that and protects it.
No, you're right, Jody. And the case you just mentioned came out of the Fourth Circuit, which has actually become one of the most progressive, appellate courts in the nation. And yet they sided with a Catholic school that said this teacher who was clearly out of step with church teaching by marrying another man, that the school was within its right to dismiss this teacher. Again, the left's up in arms about it. The ACLU's all upset about it. But it's a good reminder, in this country, we have the First Amendment. We have the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. We have these things in place that are worth fighting for, that we need to continue to fight for, that do allow us as Christians to have religious freedom, to believe what we want to in terms of doctrine and theology, and the freedom to order our lives in accordance with these values. So these values are ones that we have, but they'll go away if we don't fight for them, articulate for them. Jody, that's why we pray, we vote, and we stand for all of these things.
Well, absolutely, and that's what we are here to do at FRC, and we're deeply, deeply grateful, David Closson, for all that you do here at FRC at the Center for Biblical Worldview, and keeping us abreast not only of so many critical issues, but how those issues tie directly into a biblical worldview perspective and providing that for us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jody.